Good morning. I see there's at least maybe one with me. I had a minute where I had to find a new place to put my computer because the thing I had been storing it on disappeared. So let me just put online that this is live, and I will be right back with you. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Oh, give me just a minute. Sure, this is very exciting for the people watching later. All right, I am back. I've let the internet know we're live. Let me scooch over just a hair. So I was thinking a lot this week. There's a bunch of different stuff we could talk about if you all don't have questions. And fundamentally, I wanted to pick something that maybe we haven't talked about before. So in the state of Maine, it is actually in our state constitution that everybody has the right to vote. Now, it didn't start out that way. It was the original constitution had the right to vote in it, but it, was men of a certain age, some other stuff on it, and it evolved over time. But the actual right to vote did start out in Maine in our original constitution. And the way that that's been interpreted by our courts in Maine is that at no point in time can you really be disenfranchised as a voter. So if you go to jail, you can still register to vote in jail here. You can vote in jail. You don't ever stop being a citizen because you've gone to jail. You just had your freedoms restricted because of poor choices that you made. But it doesn't take away your sort of basic human rights. And one of them in Maine is seen as voting. And we've seen a lot of moves in the past few months and few years where folks are criminalizing behavior of groups they would perhaps like to have less say in how the United States work. And actually, that's gone on since the beginning of the United States. At the beginning of the United States, only, white male property owners essentially were able to vote of a certain age. They've had literacy tests. They've had also all sorts of other tests and things that restricted our voting. We fight a lot about voters' rights bills. And what I think we actually need is an amendment to the United States Constitution, just one line that says, all citizens shall be entitled to vote. Maybe not that exact wording, but something like that. Doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't have to be elaborate, doesn't have to have things that you can jam stuff into so a bill wouldn't pass. And so we can have that kind of amendment. It has to be something that could easily be ratified by all the states. And I think that's something that we could actually make happen, even though constitutional amendment is a very big deal. Because right now there's a lot of laws that are criminalizing the ability to participate in society. And that boils down to, it impacts a whole bunch of areas of life. We can't fix all of them with one law. That's just not practical or even really appropriate. But I think that we should be making sure that the right for everybody to vote is counted, because and this doesn't happen in Maine, but it happens across the country, where if you have certain levels of charges, usually felony, but there's other rules, in many states you can't vote. And that has been used today, in today's day and age, in 2022, to make it so people can't really participate in society. And aside from it being a way to punish people, it also really is something that can impact people as they're rehabilitating into society. If you are in jail and you have not much else to do, that's a really good time to research and get involved and figure out how things work. And a lot of people who are in jail do use it that way. And staying connected to your right to vote is a really important way to stay connected to society, particularly when you re-enter it. So I've got a few more people to join. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. This is a very sort of loose format. It's not like a town hall that I try to have be slightly more structured. This is just anything you guys want to talk about, we can talk about. I usually start talking about something in the morning just to get us going. But if you have questions, you can pop them in. And some mornings people are not awake and it just ends up with me chatting for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and that's the morning. So this format is meant to be sort of a way for you guys to get to me and ask me questions and be able to feel like you can actually reach the candidate. That's one of my big frustrations, is that a lot of people who are elected to office, particularly larger office, are people you just can't get to. I anticipate that though it won't be the same frequency when I'm elected, I won't be able to probably do 2 a week. That's a lot if you're representing a bunch of people and you're doing the job properly and you have a little bit of personal life in there too. I have children. I certainly wouldn't want to abandon them. I still would want to do an open format like this, probably at least once a fiscal quarter, if not once a month. So there's the ability to reach out. A couple more people have joined. So what we were talking about before, drop your questions in the chat, and this is open Q&A, is I think that we probably at this point in U.S. history need a constitutional amendment. And give me just a sec. I'm on a thing. Go ahead and grab yourself breakfast. We're going to head out in a few minutes. Okay, buddy? Sorry, we are going to be headed out this morning, probably to Franklin County. We can try and go all over on the weekends. And so we spend a lot of our time at fairs and festivals and events and activities in Maine as a part of my campaigning. I incorporate parenting into that. I like to bring the kids along and let them both enjoy Maine and see what it's like to be civically involved. So what we were talking about before the last few folks joined is we were talking about that I think we need a constitutional amendment to protect voting for all citizens, and that's something that I think is viable, and I think that's something that we could make happen. It would just need to be one line. Restricting voting has been used to sort of tip the outcomes of elections. And I'm not a big fan of that, but particularly as we're seeing some of the rulings that are coming out of our recent Supreme Court, and we're seeing some of the penalties that are being assessed to basic human rights, I don't think that's a right we should ever be able to strip. And again, Maine is protected from that. We actually have it in our Constitution that you can't take away voting. Although that's not the exact wording. But most states don't have that. In fact, the vast majority of states don't have that. If you commit a felony, you are prohibited from voting for indefinitely, or some states do have processes to reenfranchise. There's been a lot going on in Florida with, do you have to pay penalties? Do you just have to have served your time? Do you have to be on probation? Do you not have to be on probation? Leads to a lot of lack of clarity. And then you have citizens who, when they try to participate in voting and they believe their voting rights are restored, they end up back in jail, which takes them out of the voting pool for longer. So as we're watching some of the rulings coming out of Supreme Court, I am concerned that when we're looking at particularly reproductive rights right now, but it can apply to a broad swath of things that are basic human rights. There are bills going into place. There are laws in place right now. There's springing laws on the books that, women, people helping them get an abortion could lose their right to vote. And if you're talking about losing, women back out of the voting pool, because we're apparently going back in time 100 years, or a little over 100 years, not that much over 100 years. How bad is it that women have only been voting for 103 years? My grandmother was a walking, talking person before she had the future of a right to vote, which is sort of terrifying. So, right now there's a lot of ways set in place where we're just advising voters. I don't think that's appropriate. I think that's something that should be a constitutionally protected right. And I think it's something that will appeal to both conservatives and liberals and everyone. I mean, I think that, if you talk to somebody about whether or not the other person should be able to vote, a lot of times you'll hear, oh, no, I think that we should have people Azalea just popped in and said, "That's a crazy thing to think about." It is, but people do think about it, and this is so how it's used. There's no other legitimate reason to remove somebody's right to vote other than that you don't want them to have a say in how things are going. And if there's a group of people, and historically it's been used against minorities, it's been used against the tribes, it's been used against women, it's been used against people with alternative lifestyles, it's been used against people who are poor because they didn't own property. And there was an argument that if you weren't paying taxes, you shouldn't get to vote on how taxes are used. But we don't vote on just taxes; we vote on a wide range of rights. So yeah, it's very frustrating to watch where voting rights are going. It's very frustrating to watch people's rights being stripped over pretty basic things. And as I was saying, if you ask somebody who if you ask somebody, if the other people should be able to vote, they often will come up with a lot of reasons. Oh, I don't think they're educated enough, or oh, they're not real Americans, or oh, whatever. There's a wide range of reasons why people will justify others not being able to vote. But if you talk to them, and you can talk to both people who are liberal and conservative, so people who are very interested in protecting a lot of basic human rights, or women, slightly over half of our species. If you ask them, do you think that your right to vote should be stripped because you go and have an abortion or help somebody have an abortion? The answer, of course, is going to be no. And kind of an issue that seems to be the opposite position, though it isn't. There are many people who like being armed that also support women's rights, and there are people who don't support women's rights, but also don't like weapons. But I'm very much generalizing here. If you take somebody and say, well, let's, maybe it's not privacy that you value. Maybe it's your right to bear arms. If your right to bear arms, if somebody makes a law that makes that gun you're very fond of, illegal, and you get a felony, should they be able to take away your voting rights? I think that near universally the answer that you will get is no, I should be able to vote. You shouldn't be able to take away my rights over that. So I think that if we were to posture it, that no one should be able to take away your rights because of political disagreement, or be able to, if you get put in jail for something that maybe you feel it's trumped up. A lot of people do feel their charges are not appropriate, and a lot of charges aren't appropriate. We've got some pretty icky criminal code. I think that it should be something that you can get a broad coalition and a lot of folks on board for, because we have a lot of people that are afraid of the other team being in charge and suppressing them and taking their rights away. And in fact, there is some of that. And so we should be trying to root that out. So that's sort of what I was chewing on last night. Excellent thing to have you wake up in the middle of the night wondering about. If you guys have any questions, a few more people have joined. You're certainly welcome to put them in the chat. I can give you some previews of what we're going to be doing for the campaign. So we're in that period of summer where there's not a whole bunch of stuff to do because a lot of people are on vacation. So what I've been doing is touring around a little bit, answering a lot of questions via email. I get a lot of questions via email. It takes a lot of time. I've turned more people want to email than call, which is good because phone calls take a lot of time. And not that I don't love talking to all of you. It is something that is very time consuming to have those lengthy conversations. But I've been returning a lot of emails. I go out in the community a bunch. I either go by myself or sometimes I will take the kids, and we will, we go to fairs and festivals, and we're going to go to a lot of events coming up. If there aren't events, we sort of visit different regions of the state, which again is both great for my kids. I like them to see the state and to see what civic engagement looks like. It's also gives a lot of opportunities to meet folks. I don't necessarily publish a lot of those in advance because sometimes it's very weather dependent where we end up in the state. There's no point in being in an event if you're going to get rained out of it. So You can usually find somewhere that isn't rainy or isn't too oppressively hot, depending on what the weather is doing. And it was warm enough last night that I'm not in my normal PJs. I'm in alternate PJs. And then, as we have more fairs, as people come back from summer vacation, as there's more activities going into the fall, you'll see me at slightly more predictable events. And then this last week started at the beginning of the virtual availability series. So unless there is a conflict like a forum or a debate, Tuesday nights at 7, I will be doing a town hall online. And Saturday mornings, unless there's a conflict someplace that I need to be that is important enough to sort of take over this. So there's going to be these very open forum question and answers. These events are designed to sort of give that connection where it's missing. If we didn't have so many things going around, I would probably have an in-person one once a week. But we have a very large geographic area. We have COVID going around. Monkeypox is starting to pop up. Maine's had its first case. A lot of people are medically vulnerable and elderly in Maine. So this just seems like the best format for folks to give to me. Well, to take a break from posting weird humor on your Twitter feed, what is your stance on the current obsession with stock buybacks? I might need you to clarify that a little bit, Kevin. Are you talking about companies buying back huge amounts of stock and going private or getting closer to private? If you could clarify, I'm happy to answer that. Gives Kevin a minute to type. I'm going to presume while typing that he's asking about that many are buying back a lot of stock, and a lot of companies use their PPP loans to buy back stock, or to have the resources from other places to buy back stock. A lot of companies don't enjoy public ownership. It's very restrictive. And let's see whether it should be restricted and how strictly price manipulation. So yeah, I mean, a lot of companies generally don't like being publicly held. They sell stock to free up resources, to expand, to stabilize, to do a variety of activities. That comes with some prestige if your stock does well. That also comes with a lot of constraints on your ability to operate. There is price manipulation that comes with that, although stock buybacks to price manipulation, that's not the only price manipulation that exists. It's not as directly tied to congressional oversight as some business activities are. And we don't enforce a lot of antitrust and price fixing problems as much as we should. A lot of that is executive branch function. A lot of that goes through, the AG's office. And so that's something that's sort of not as directly touched by Congress. I would like to see, one of the things I really enjoyed about Elizabeth Warren is she put a lot of work into the CFPB, so the Consumer Financial Protection Board. I think I'm awful at acronyms. And, I looked at a lot of her work as it related to what was happening with homeowners. There were a lot of foreclosures in 2008. Yes, there were some before and quite a few after 2008. I'm actually on the state's roster to mediate out of part of our foreclosure diversion program, but they touched way more than that. They touched on corruption generally, the way things were financed. I would like to see us give some more teeth to that agency and have it look at monopolies and have it look at how stock manipulation is. Maybe have them take a gander at crypto. I know that a lot of people love crypto because it gives them a place that's unregulated, but that means a lot of really vulnerable people that aren't financially savvy are, losing tens of thousands of dollars or everything they have. And sometimes it's less than tens of thousands of dollars, but it's just everything they have. And I think having a little bit more oversight in some of those areas might be helpful, or at least a place where people could go to get resources if oversight's not appropriate. So I do think that I think a lot of companies have been buying stock back lately and have been reinvesting in themselves in ways that doesn't actually build wealth for the American consumer, and have done so at the expense of the American consumer. Some of those are going to be inappropriate. Some of those are going to be inappropriate and possibly illegal. So there's a gap in a lot of business between what's appropriate and what's illegal. And there's a lot of things that are inappropriate but not illegal, and there's a lot of things that are legal that are not enforced. And I don't know that I'm answering Kevin's question really well, because it's a very kind of broad question. It's also 8 a.m. and pre-caffeine. But I do think that there is probably a large-scale money laundering for criminal enterprises in crypto. Yeah, crypto is like the new real estate for money laundering. A lot of money laundering goes through real estate too, which is why you see certain varieties of families get really into real estate, art, things that are hard to pin down a real value on. Crypto is a great place for price manipulation. I mean, actually, that's when you said price manipulation, I didn't go to stock buybacks. I went right to crypto because there's been a lot of pump and dump schemes online. And I suspect some celebrities that probably are pretty embarrassed with their involvement for plugging crypto down, only to have it immediately tank. And a lot of people who believed in the celebrities invested, and that was probably not easy to pin into illegal activity at the time, but icky in a fairly profound way. We have a lot of spaces where people can launder money, and because of the way that our political system is, you can buy your ways around enforcement pretty easily. We really need to get money out of politics, so that is harder to do. And I mean, that's part of Maine raising. I try really hard to be in a position where nobody's offering me bazillions of dollars for my vote. So it's just simply not available for sale. And we need more people who have that. Right now, our entire election system, it's way, way too easy to buy legislation if you've got lots of money, and way, way too difficult if you don't to participate. And my campaign's sort of a hallmark of that. It is so frustrating to me to watch us all say, we need people who are just like us in politics. We need people who understand what it's like to be poor. We need people who understand what it's like to struggle at the end of the month. We need people who get the intricacies and how it interacts with law. And then instead of promoting people like that to these positions, we go look for somebody that doesn't have that life experience and want to promote them. Oh, but let's go have this person be our champion. And that person maybe hasn't ever experienced poverty or has, directly or indirectly, or doesn't know how the law works. I had somebody the other day who was, telling me that the men in my race, Bruce Poliquin has a lot of financial experience, so he might be better at protecting us, or Jared Golden, military experience, might be better at protecting us. Those men aren't going to protect us. Neither one of them's ever had to live on top ramen. Neither one of them has ever, been on the side of it where they don't know how to choose between food and housing in a month. And a huge amount of our population deals with that. So you need that, and then you also need, I have 3 business degrees. I have an associate's, a bachelor's, and a master's in business. You also need to have the savvy to be able to look at things like crypto and things like price manipulation and stock manipulation and go, aha, that's why the money isn't pumping back into the economy. It's getting pulled out right here. And we are disastrously close to a financial system like Russia. I mean, we have oligarchs. We have people whose money just skips us entirely and pops onto people's yachts. I mean, we have huge amounts of wealth extracted from our economy where people aren't paying their fair share. But because we just have more money in general, it's been less noticeable, I guess. But it's certainly noticeable to me. It's becoming more noticeable to all of us. I think one of the things, there's been a lot of bad that's come out of the pandemic, but I think one of the gifts that the pandemic has given us is being able to say, hey, we don't have an equitable situation here. With people just kind of pretending it doesn't exist anymore, I think a lot of people are shaking their heads and going, okay, but what if you're still sick? Like, you should still go to work when you're sick. Aren't you going to get everybody else sick? Right. You've been telling us for a couple of years this is really important, and now it's not important because you're not making enough money off of us. I don't understand. And so I think we are looking and reevaluating some of those systems, but it's not going to change unless we put forward people to make wiser, better choices that are aware of both the high level places where corruption can occur and the needs of the average duck, right? I mean, we have a lot of people in Congress that are just truly disconnected with what it takes to survive. And that's why we didn't get things that we should have at the beginning of the pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, we should have had wraparound, no enrollment, Medicaid, not Medicare, Medicaid, different funding pool, lots of different mechanisms on the back end that make more sense for that. Conversation for another day when I'm more caffeinated. That would have been a really good time for us to try out UBI and see if it does work and if it does lift people out of poverty. Our goal shouldn't be to look at how much we give away or don't give away. Our goal should be, are our citizens more secure? Is everybody happier? Is more money circulating in the economy? Sometimes you can put $1 into the economy and 10 cents comes back. Sometimes you can put $1 in the economy or $5 or $6 comes back. There are some studies with UBI that show when you have, and UBI, for those of you who don't know what that is, universal basic income. I'm not a huge advocate for universal basic income, but I think we need some times to test it and see if it works. I'm open to the possibility if the data and the reality of it meets what the pitch is. And as we were talking about with things like money laundering and crypto, the pitch doesn't always meet. The pitch doesn't always meet the reality, but if it does meet the reality, and it could, and there's ways where it could, the beginning of the pandemic when everybody was sitting home and couldn't work, that would have been a really good time to try out UBI and see if it did make money circulate better and see if it did provide a safety net that was healthier for us. And if you didn't need it, you would just get taxed on the back end and, no harm, no foul. So I wish that we would be trying out some of these systems and looking for things that are more sustainable for our average citizen and are vulnerable. We should be gauged by the most vulnerable among us. So it is 8:30. There's a few more people who have joined. I'm happy to answer any more questions if anybody has any. Don't feel like you have to ask any if you don't have any. The next opportunity to connect, and we can talk for a couple more minutes if anybody has any more questions. The next opportunity to connect is going to be Tuesday, or at least online. Tuesday at 7, there will be another town hall. I haven't decided what the focus of it will be, but send me a message if you'd like me to pick up a certain focus. And I'll be here next Saturday as well. I don't think I have any events that make it so I can't be here next Saturday. Thank you for waking up with me. I hope you have a great day. I don't see any more questions. Thank you for the couple folks who asked questions. Oh, at some point in time, the future of automation UBI will be quite likely to be necessary. So I'd be happy to see more and larger scale tests of it. So that's from Kevin. I agree. I mean, it may very well be a necessity. And I'd like to see it tested. We've had such small tests that the small data pools that we have from tests in the US and abroad, and there's been very limited testing in the US, they're promising. And so when something's promising, you're supposed to do more of it. But a lot of people look at it and say, oh my gosh, free money. And to some extent, it is, oh my gosh, free money. And I'm a cheap person because I'm very frugal and on a budget. But if it's cheap and it's free money and it lifts people out of poverty and doesn't make the rest of us more poor, okay, I'd be willing to do that. So I think that you should work hard for things. I think you should value things. But when you talk about UBI, you're not necessarily talking about like we're going to give everybody $1 million in a pony. It's us kind of collectively saying we're one of the wealthiest countries on the planet, and no matter what your personal failings are, nobody should go hungry. We have enough resources that hunger just shouldn't be a thing. And that doesn't mean that the UBI will be sufficient and adequate to buy you lobster for each meal, which is very expensive these days, especially if you're at a fancy tourist place. But you shouldn't be starving in the streets. We shouldn't live in a Soylent Green future. So, I think there are some possibilities there. I'm surprised we haven't done more investment in it as a country, and I'm surprised we haven't done more tests. Because again, if the goal is to increase the net happiness, the stability, to make us all, let's see, one of the things that kills me for make better decisions. So if you make a bad decision, you're supposed to starve, and that's it. I don't think we punish people. I don't think we withhold food for bad decisions. That's not healthy. I don't think you get to have whatever you want, unlimited. I do think that people, unfortunately, sometimes need a little motivation, but I also think that starving people is not an appropriate response to personal failings. Same thing with a lot of our medical care. Should you be able to have 28 plastic surgeries on the house to look like a Barbie doll? Probably not. I don't think that's appropriate. If you're dying in the street, should you get help? Absolutely. So part of what we're really struggling with this country is knowing when and how. Hang on just a second, buddy. Where's your charger on? Okay, but we're going to leave it just a minute, so don't get into a game because we're going to be heading out. I want to go. Well, we'll talk about it in a minute. I'm doing something. Sorry. My children usually stay asleep until 9 in the morning on weekends, but not this morning. So yeah, I think a lot of what we need to figure out is, from a humanity standpoint, what is an adequate support network and an adequate level of care that we can provide and feel like everybody's basic human rights have been met. And then from a financial standpoint, if we look at return on investment, what is the amount of money that we can invest per person in different categories? All things are not like what you put in to medical care is not the same thing as what you put into basic support is not the same as what you put into food as what you put into housing. And you might address some of those with cash, and you might address some of those with available services or available options. But, I've long said things like it would be less expensive to have a bunkhouse where the unhoused can go have a drink and crash. It would be less expensive for us as a society and more humane. So there's your return on investment and there's your human rights. If we did that, instead of throw people in jail, jail is not an efficient use of resources, and it is not necessarily appropriate. So, we have drinking in public laws that are absolutely ridiculous. If you have lots of money, you can sit in a restaurant and drink. But if you don't have money, you can't, have a $2 beer because you're unhoused and you don't have anywhere to drink it. So, I think we need to look at each one of those return on investments and return on humanity for each category, and even sometimes maybe in that category more. And some of those are not going to be federal things. Some of those might be federally administered. Some of them might be federally funded and state administered. Some of them might be state things entirely. But I think we need to shift how we're looking at our society, because right now, the lens that we're using to look at our society is what benefits our politicians most in their pocket and reelection. And that is not working out well for us. So I don't have any more questions in the chat. You guys know how to find me online. I do try to answer questions on Twitter as much as possible. I almost forgot to ask you a very serious question. How do you rate birch syrup versus maple syrup, birch beer versus root beer? Well, I don't care for birch syrup. I prefer maple syrup, but I like birch beer more than root beer. So um, I guess one's better as a topping and the other's better as a beverage. On that note, I hope you have a truly lovely Saturday. We're going to go hop in the car and find a pond to jump in because it is going to be very hot. So keep cool. We're going to, I think, head up to the mountains where it's supposed to be in the 80s. It's going to be in the 90s on the coast and down south. So do stay cool, do stay hydrated. If you're feeling at all overheated, sit down, get some cool air. Make sure you drink water. Make sure that you are not pressing yourself. We're going to be in this heat wave for just a little bit. And this is what's happening with climate change. And maybe that'll be the topic of our next event. I hope you all have a great Saturday. Thank you.